At 3:30 in the morning, Eastern Time, on July 1st, a United States Navy helicopter went down in the Arabian Sea. Not in some quiet stretch of open water either. This happened close to Iran, inside one of the most dangerous, most heavily watched maritime corridors on the planet, at a moment when tensions between Washington and Tehran are already stretched to the breaking point. Within hours of that helicopter hitting the water, a second crisis broke out hundreds of miles away, off the coast of Yemen, where armed men carrying rocket-propelled grenades boarded a merchant vessel and seized control of it. Two separate emergencies, in two different locations, within the same narrow window of time, all unfolding in a region where the United States military is already engaged in an active confrontation with Iran. If you think that's a coincidence, stay with this, because the timing here matters more than it might first appear. This is what we know, and it's worth laying out carefully, because in situations like this, the first reports are never the full picture. According to United States Naval Forces Central Command and the U.S. Fifth Fleet, the aircrew of an MH-60S Seahawk helicopter assigned to the aircraft carrier USS George H.W. Bush conducted what the Navy is describing as an emergency water landing in the Arabian Sea. 3 of the 4 crew members aboard that helicopter have already been recovered and are listed in stable condition back on the carrier. At least 1 American remains unaccounted for, and search and rescue operations are actively underway to locate that missing crew member. Here's the detail that matters most right now, and it's the one people are going to be asking about. As of this reporting, there is no indication that the helicopter was shot down by Iran. The Navy has been clear about that point, but it has also been just as clear that the cause of the incident is still under investigation, and that is a very different statement than confirming it was a mechanical failure or pilot error. In a region where American aircraft are flying combat and surveillance missions near an active adversary, no indication of hostile fire is not the same thing as confirmed not hostile fire. That distinction is going to matter a great deal over the coming days as investigators piece together exactly what brought that helicopter down. Think about where this happened for a second, because geography tells you almost as much as the official statement does. The USS George H.W. Bush is a Nimitz-class supercarrier, one of the most heavily defended and closely monitored vessels in the entire U.S. Navy. Its presence in the Arabian Sea, positioned near Iranian waters during an active period of hostilities, is not accidental. Carrier strike groups don't wander into contested maritime zones by chance. They are placed there deliberately to project power, to support ongoing operations, and to maintain the ability to strike or defend at a moment's notice. An MH-60S Seahawk operating off that carrier would typically be flying logistics, surveillance, anti-submarine, or search and rescue missions in support of the broader fleet. Losing one of those aircraft in these waters at this specific moment is the kind of event that immediately raises hard questions, even while officials are still urging caution about jumping to conclusions. And this is where the story becomes bigger than a single aircraft. The Navy has been noticeably careful about exactly where in the Arabian Sea this incident took place. They have not released precise coordinates. That omission is deliberate, and it is not about protecting classified technology. It's about protecting people. Somewhere in that stretch of water, American search and rescue teams are looking for a missing service member in territory close enough to Iran that revealing an exact location could complicate the recovery effort or put rescue crews at greater risk. If Iranian vessels or aircraft became aware of precisely where an American crew member might be adrift, that detail alone could turn a rescue mission into something far more dangerous. Withholding the exact location isn't an attempt to hide information from the public. It's an operational decision meant to keep a bad situation from becoming worse. There is a reason to hold on to some cautious optimism here, and it's worth saying plainly. American combat search and rescue capability is, without exaggeration, the most advanced in the world. This is not the first time in recent memory that U.S. forces have had to locate and recover personnel in hostile or contested territory. When an American F-15 went down earlier in this broader conflict, rescue forces were able to locate and recover the pilot. That track record matters. It doesn't guarantee a positive outcome here, and nothing should be assumed until official word comes through, but it does mean the people conducting this search are the best trained and best equipped in the world for exactly this kind of mission. Right now, the most useful thing anyone watching this situation can do is wait for confirmed updates rather than speculate, while understanding that every hour that passes without a full recovery adds weight to an already tense moment. But the helicopter is only half of what happened on July 1st, and the second half of the story moved just as fast. Roughly the same day, word came in of a suspected armed boarding incident off the coast of Yemen. The United Kingdom Maritime Trade Operations, the organization responsible for tracking and issuing advisories on threats to commercial shipping in the region, put out a warning after a merchant vessel reported that it had been illegally boarded. According to that report, a small craft carrying 4 armed individuals, equipped with rocket-propelled grenades, approached the merchant ship and forced their way aboard. The attackers reportedly caused damage to the vessel's bridge and nearby compartments after gaining access. The crew, following standard anti-piracy protocol, retreated into the ship's citadel. a hardened, lockable safe room specifically designed to protect crew members during exactly this kind of hijacking, and they are reported to be safe while awaiting outside assistance. Here's why this matters far beyond a single ship. Off the coast of Yemen is Houthi territory, and the Houthis are not an unknown actor in this conflict. This is an Iranian-backed group that has, since the earliest days of the broader regional war, repeatedly threatened to target shipping lanes connected to Israel, the United States, and their allies. Up until this point, the Houthis had largely limited their involvement to sporadic missile and drone launches, most of which were intercepted or caused limited damage. A direct boarding and hijacking of a merchant vessel, carried out with rocket-propelled grenades, represents an escalation in method. This isn't a missile fired from a distance. This is armed men physically taking control of a ship. If this incident is confirmed to be carried out by Houthi forces, it signals a shift from remote harassment of shipping lanes to direct hands-on seizure operations, and that is a meaningfully more aggressive posture than what has been seen from that group throughout most of this conflict. Put the two events side by side and the picture gets more serious. On one side of the region, a U.S. Navy helicopter goes down under circumstances still being investigated. On the other side, a merchant vessel is boarded and hijacked by armed men in a corridor controlled by an Iranian-backed militia. Neither event has been officially tied to the other. Nobody in an official capacity is claiming this was coordinated. But when you're operating in a theater where one nation, Iran, has proxies and allies stretching across multiple fronts, from its own territory to Yemen to the broader Gulf region, two separate crises breaking out on the same day, is the kind of pattern that military analysts do not simply dismiss as random. Even if these turn out to be entirely unrelated incidents, and they may well be, they land at a moment when every actor in this conflict is watching for signs of the war widening beyond its original boundaries. To understand why this moment carries so much weight, you need the broader context of where this conflict currently stands. In the days leading up to this incident, the United States carried out a sustained bombing campaign against Iranian targets, described in official commentary as 3 consecutive nights of strikes aimed at preventing Iran from developing a nuclear weapon. That campaign represents one of the most direct and aggressive American military actions against Iran in decades, a level of confrontation that moves well past the sanctions and proxy conflicts that have defined U.S. Iran relations for the better part of 2 decades. When a nation absorbs that kind of direct military strike, the response rarely ends there. Iran has spent years building a network of allied and proxy forces, specifically so that it never has to respond to pressure through a single, easily traceable channel. The Houthis in Yemen are one piece of that network. Hezbollah in Lebanon is another. Various militia groups across Iraq and Syria round out the rest. When Tehran itself faces direct pressure, history in this region shows that pressure tends to get distributed outward through exactly these kinds of proxy actors, and exactly these kinds of maritime and asymmetric incidents. This is the part most casual observers miss when they see headlines like this. A helicopter going down and a ship getting hijacked can look, on the surface, like 2 disconnected stories from a chaotic part of the world. But in a region where Iran has spent decades cultivating exactly this kind of layered, deniable pressure network, isolated incidents rarely stay isolated for long. Even without official confirmation of any link between these 2 events, understanding the broader strategic picture explains why officials, analysts, and the markets are all watching this moment so closely. Now let's talk about what's happening on the diplomatic side, because there's a parallel track running alongside all of this military activity, and it complicates the picture even further. According to statements attributed to an Iranian negotiator, Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan held 2 separate meetings on what's being referred to as the Islamabad Memorandum of Understanding. Part of that discussion reportedly involved the use of funds, roughly $6 billion, that have been held in Qatar and were meant to be released for approved goods purchases on Iran's behalf. According to the reporting, Qatar has stated that those funds have not yet actually been transferred to Iran. It's worth being careful here, because claims about frozen or released funds tied to Iran have circulated for years, often becoming more complicated or contested the closer you look at them. What the material suggests is that discussions around this financial arrangement are ongoing, and that an urgent monitoring channel is expected to be established in the near future. Whether that channel materializes and what it actually accomplishes remains to be seen. At the same time, Iran's own leadership is sending a very different message publicly than the quiet diplomatic maneuvering happening behind the scenes might suggest. A statement attributed to Iran's supreme leader reaffirmed what was described as the fixed policy of the Islamic Republic, framed as continuing the path of the founder of the revolution, with language describing ongoing support for what was called resistance against what the statement referred to as the Zionist American enemy. That is not the language of a government preparing to stand down. Regardless of what quiet financial negotiations might be happening through intermediaries like Qatar and Pakistan, the public messaging coming out of Tehran's top leadership is defiant, framed around continuation rather than resolution. This is a pattern worth understanding on its own. Regimes under maximum pressure often run two tracks simultaneously. Public defiance, meant to project strength domestically into allied proxy groups, alongside quieter back-channel diplomacy aimed at finding some kind of off-ramp without appearing to capitulate. Both things can be true at the same time, and both are clearly happening right now. Then there's the American side of the messaging, and it stands in sharp contrast to what's coming out of Tehran. In public comments, President Donald Trump described what he called the denuclearization of Iran as moving along well, referencing the recent strikes and characterizing ongoing meetings as productive. He pointed to the stock market setting records on what he described as a near-daily basis, and highlighted that oil prices had fallen to around $68 a barrel, a level he noted was actually lower than when the campaign against Iran's nuclear program began. He also pointed to falling gasoline prices as evidence that the broader economic picture was moving in a positive direction, despite the ongoing military confrontation. That claim about oil prices deserves a closer look, because it tells you something important about how markets are currently reading this conflict. Historically, direct military conflict involving Iran sends oil prices sharply higher, almost immediately, because so much of the world's oil supply moves through waters Iran can threaten to disrupt. The fact that oil prices have actually fallen since the start of this confrontation suggests one of two things. Either markets believe this conflict will remain contained and short in duration, or markets believe that despite the rhetoric, Iran's actual capacity to seriously disrupt global oil flows has been degraded to the point where traders no longer see it as the same kind of existential threat to supply that it once was. Neither of those explanations is necessarily reassuring on its own, but both suggest that professional traders, who move billions of dollars based on exactly these kinds of judgment calls, are not currently pricing in a full-scale regional oil crisis. That leads directly into the final piece of this puzzle. And it may be the most important number in the entire situation: traffic through the Strait of Hormuz. According to the latest figures, only 34 vessels passed through the strait in a single day, compared to a pre-war average of roughly 100 vessels per day. That is not a minor dip. That is a collapse of more than 2/3 in shipping traffic through one of the most critical choke points in the entire global economy. If you're not familiar with why the Strait of Hormuz matters this much, here's the short version. This narrow waterway, sitting between Iran and the Arabian Peninsula, is the single most important oil transit route on the planet. A significant share of the entire world's seaborne oil exports pass through this strait every single day under normal conditions. When traffic through Hormuz drops by 2/3, that is not a symbolic gesture. That is shipping companies, insurers, and oil producers making a very real, very expensive calculation that the risk of moving vessels through that corridor right now outweighs the profit of doing so. Every vessel that chooses not to make that transit represents lost revenue, delayed deliveries, and rising insurance costs that eventually get passed down the line to consumers, even if that increase hasn't fully shown up at the gas pump yet. This is the part that connects every single piece of today's story together. A helicopter goes down near Iran. A ship gets hijacked off Yemen by suspected Houthi forces. Diplomatic talks continue quietly in the background while Iran's leadership publicly vows continued resistance. And underneath all of it, the actual flow of global shipping through the world's most important oil corridor has dropped by more than 2/3. Individually, any one of these developments might be explainable as an isolated event. Together, they paint a picture of a region where the risk of miscalculation, of one incident spiraling into something larger, is higher right now than it has been in a long time. This is also where it becomes important to separate what is confirmed from what is still uncertain, because that distinction is exactly what determines whether this situation stays contained or escalates further. The helicopter incident, as of this reporting, has no confirmed connection to hostile action. The ship hijacking has not been officially attributed to any specific group, even though the location and method strongly point toward Houthi involvement. The financial talks involving Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan remain, according to the reporting, unresolved and unconfirmed in terms of any funds actually changing hands. Everything here sits in a category of developing, not confirmed, and that distinction matters enormously in a region where misinformation and premature conclusions have, historically, made volatile situations even more volatile. What happens next depends heavily on 3 separate threads that are all moving at the same time. First, the outcome of the ongoing search and rescue operation for the missing American crew member, and whatever the investigation eventually determines, caused that helicopter to go down. If investigators confirm hostile action was involved, even indirectly, that would represent a significant escalation in this conflict, one that could shift the entire calculus of how the United States responds moving forward. Second, how the international community and shipping industry respond to the hijacking off Yemen, and whether it turns out to be an isolated incident or the beginning of a renewed pattern of Houthi attacks on commercial vessels, something that would have direct consequences for global shipping costs and eventually consumer prices. Third, and perhaps most importantly, whether the quiet diplomatic track involving Qatar and Pakistan produces any real movement, or whether Iran's public posture of continued resistance ends up being the more accurate signal of where this conflict is actually headed. There's a broader lesson sitting underneath all of this, one that applies well beyond just this single day of developments. Wars in this region rarely end with a single dramatic event. They tend to wind down, or wind up, through exactly this kind of accumulation of smaller incidents. A helicopter incident here, a hijacking there, a round of quiet diplomacy that may or may not go anywhere. Individually, none of these events guarantees a wider war. But collectively, they represent the kind of environment where a single miscalculation, a single incident that turns out to be more deliberate than it first appears, can shift an already tense standoff into something far more dangerous, far more quickly than most people expect. For now, the facts on the ground are these. A United States Navy helicopter went down in the Arabian Sea in the early morning hours of July 1st. 3 crew members have been recovered and are receiving medical care aboard the USS George H.W. Bush. At least 1 American remains missing, and search and rescue operations continue at this hour. A separate incident off the coast of Yemen has left a merchant vessel under the control of armed hijackers, with the crew safely secured inside the ship's citadel awaiting rescue. Diplomatic talks involving Iran, Qatar, and Pakistan continue quietly in the background, even as Iran's supreme leader publicly reaffirms a commitment to continued resistance. And traffic through the Strait of Hormuz, the artery through which so much of the world's oil supply depends, has dropped to roughly a third of its normal volume. None of these threads exist in isolation. Every one of them is a symptom of the same underlying reality, a region balanced on the edge of a wider conflict, where the difference between containment and escalation may come down to how a single missing crew member is found, how a single hijacked ship is resolved, and whether the quiet diplomacy happening behind closed doors can outpace the public rhetoric of continued resistance. Whatever happens in the coming days will not just determine the fate of the people directly involved in these 2 incidents. It will help decide whether this remains a contained, targeted conflict, or whether it becomes something the entire world ends up paying for, 1 barrel of oil, 1 shipping delay, and 1 headline at a time.